Hello there and welcome. My name is David Arena. I'm a Senior Specialist and Applications Engineer here on the 3D Scanning team at GoEngineer. Today we're going to look at a cool function inside of Geomagic Design X. It's the Unroll and Roll Scan function. This command unrolls point clouds or meshes to make them lay open. This command also lets you roll a flat mesh in a cylindrical fashion about an axis and symmetry point. When the scan is unrolled, a 2D sketch with design intent can be created, then rolled to establish a 3D sketch to continue modeling. Here we have a scan of a drill bit, and we are going to unroll the scan into a flat scan. We're going to create a 2D sketch, then we're going to re-roll the 2D sketch into a 3D sketch to continue the modeling process, ultimately creating a CAD model. Let's get started. Okay, so here we have the scan of the drill bit here. And before we get to the cool unroll and roll features and functions, we're going to go ahead and just model this basic body of the drill bit. So I'm going to begin by creating a vector, and I'm going to say I'm going to intersect the right plane and the front plane to establish basically the axis of rotation here. I'll say OK to that. Next, I'm just going to go ahead and do a mesh sketch on the right plane. And you can see here we get basically a preview where that plane cuts through the mesh. And I'm going to go ahead and draw the profile of this rotational sketch here. First, I'm going to start off by a constructed line, which is going to establish our center line. Okay, and then next, I'm going to actually go and show, this is a pretty simple profile to draw, but just to be a little different and show you something different, I'm going to go ahead and use this auto sketch function here. And I'm going to say basically create a sketch automatically for me based on my selections. So basically I'm just going to select a window drag over this area here. And then you can see here this is established kind of like an arc, but if I play with this resolution slider bar here, I can kind of make it a line to ensure that it's a line. And then over here, I'm just going to go ahead and accept what's going on over here. I'll say accept. Now I know that there's some tangency here, and it's not being constrained automatically. So I can manually make a constraint on tangency, or I can come over here to this kind of this tangency constraint threshold. If I click in there, anything that's within 5 degrees will tangency will be applied. So now you can see it updates the profile there. Next, I need to create a single line here at the end. So I'm just going to go a little bit beyond the drill bit and just draw a single line like so. And now I'm ready to start trimming this sketch up. So I'm going to go ahead and start by trimming using a corner trim, trimming that line to this line to the center line, and same thing on the other side here, just that line to that center line. And just for good measure, since I'm kind of drawing in this chamfer here, I'm going to go ahead and put a dimension on this. So I'm going to go ahead and say, I'll fix this for a second, and I'll say I want to go ahead and add a smart dimension, which is going to be an angle, and it shows up at 46 degrees. I'm going to say, well, it should be 45. So say OK to that. And that looks pretty good. Little piece here. Let's get rid of that. And I'll say OK to that. We'll exit the sketch. And now I'll just do my revolve to get my main body here. So now if I turn on that solid body, you can see that that's our first feature that we created. Okay, so I have a couple more features here before we do the unroll again. So I'm going to go ahead and establish this kind of there's two cuts here on the scan, what we're going to do. So first I'm going to start with a mesh sketch here. I'll crop this down a little bit and say OK. And next I'm going to go ahead and draw my sketch. I'll start again with a center line. I'll just snap to the vector here and just draw a center line. For construction, I'll turn that off and just basically double click on here for a second. And then I'm going to go ahead and accept that. And next I'm going to mirror this line over. So my symmetry line is my center line. My entities is a single line here just to mirror it across that. And I'm also going to do a couple more things. I need to resize this. I want this to go beyond the solid body. And next I'll go ahead and trim these together using a corner trim. Okay, lastly, I'll go ahead and put a angle dimension on here. So that line to the center line, what's the angle It's 40.5, so I'll even that up to say 40 and say OK. I'll exit the sketch, and then I will go ahead and do a surface extrude, and I'll pick the option or method of midplane, ensuring it goes beyond the solid body. I'll say extrude, bring it back, and now I'll use that as a cutting tool. Go to the model tab. We're going to cut with the surface, and the body is the drill bit body. I'll say next step, and I'm going to keep the big piece there. I'm trimming off the end. Okay, so there's the second cut I need to do. I'm going to go ahead and create a mesh sketch on the front plane here. And I'll crop this down a little bit and say OK to this setup. And I'm going to go ahead and turn off a couple things. Turn off the surface, the solid, and the mesh. So now I'm just working with these polylines here. Again, I'm going to create a constructed line, establishing the center, basically my mirror line. And I'll go ahead and create a line here and say OK to that. And I'm going to go ahead and I'll dimension that right now. Put a smart dimension on that. So we're going to say, let's get this line and this one. What's that angle? About 60 degrees. So I'll type in 60. Accept that. And now I'm going to mirror this over about that line. And say OK to the mirror. So now I just need to resize and trim. So I'm going to go ahead and resize this profile here. And then I'm going to trim these together using a corner trim. So trim these two together. Okay, so that's that sketch. I'm going to exit the sketch. And again, extrude a surface midplane. And I'll turn my solid on just so I can see how far I need to extend this. So it looks like it's extending beyond the solid, which is what I'm looking for. I'll say OK. Turn the surfaces back on. And next I'll go ahead and trim that solid again with this one instead. The first one was that one. Next I'll go ahead and say target body. And then again, which side do I want to keep? I'm going to keep this bigger piece. Okay, so that's what the tip of the solid looks like at this time. And just for good measure, I'll just finish off this back here. There's a couple slot cuts back here. So I'll go ahead and turn on my mesh and turn off my solid for a second. So I'm going to establish a plane that's basically parallel with the right plane. So I'm going to go ahead and say, I'm going to create a plane. My position is going to be down here in this pocket. And my normal is going to be the X direction. And say OK. Now I'll create a mesh sketch on that. And I'll pull this out slightly just so I get a good profile to work with. I'll say OK to that. Now this is going to be basically a slot. So I'm going to go ahead and use my slot function here, right here. And I'm going to say fit polyline, so I'm going to go ahead and touch off on some of this geometry here to establish my slot and accept that. And on this end, I'm just going to drag it out a little further, like so. And then, of course, I can kind of grab this line and put it back where it was. So that looks good. We'll go ahead and exit out and turn on my solid for a second. So I'm going to create another solid here. I'm going to go ahead and not cut this because we don't have the ability to mirror features at this time in Design X, so I'm going to go ahead and leave it unchecked. And also, I think there was a little draft in there. I did measure it before. I didn't show you that, but there's a little draft angle. It was about 12 degrees, so let me put that in. And that was the opposite direction, so something like so. And say OK. Now I'm going to go ahead and mirror this solid across to the other side. And my symmetry plane is going to be my right plane. I'll say OK. And next, I'm going to go ahead and Boolean subtract these two bodies out of the main body. So underneath the model tab here, I'm going to go to Boolean. I'm going to say cut. And my two bodies are these two. My main body is this one. and I'll say go ahead. So now we have that cut on the back side of the drill bit. Okay, now let's get to the fun stuff. We're going to go ahead and unroll this mesh into a flat pattern essentially. So we have the vector that we're going to use as the direction essentially, or the unrolling axis, and we need to establish a point as well. So I'm going to go ahead and turn on the mesh and look here. I'm going to establish a point right along the right plane, or projected to the right plane. So I'm going to go ahead and go to my point, my reference point, and I'm going to say projected. And I'm going to pick a vertex that's pretty close to that plane already, and then I'm going to pick the plane itself, and that's going to create a point right on that plane on the mesh. That's going to serve essentially as kind of the trimming or symmetry. When it unrolls it, that's going to be kind of the center of symmetry. So that's all I need for that. So I'm going to go ahead and go to my polygons tab here and go to unroll or roll. So we're going to unroll this because it's already a circular shape. So I'm going to say my target is the mesh, my axis is the vector we have, vector 1, and my split start point is going to be point number 1. So it kind of previews this plane, and again it's going to flatten it on either side of that plane. So I'll say OK. And that is the unroll. So that is the flat pattern essentially of the drill bit. Now it allows me to draw kind of, if there were design intent, it allows me to draw in 2D, and then we can basically re-roll the sketch that I create to make a 3D, in this case more of a 3D helical spline. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. I'm going to go ahead and say I need to establish a plane again. So I'll say give me a plane. Again, I'm going to say position and normal. So position will be that vertice, and normal is going to be my Z direction. I'll say OK, and now I can do a mesh sketch on that plane. And I need to lower this into the part a little bit, so I'll say, well, I'll try like 5 thousandths, 0.005, and go the opposite direction. Okay, so now we get kind of a preview of that plane cutting through the mesh. And I'll go ahead and crop this out. We'll say OK. So now I just need to draw what I need. So I'm going to go ahead and start just by drawing a couple lines here. That's really all we need to establish this helical pattern here. So I'm going to go ahead and do a mesh sketch real quick. I'm going to do this one, and then this one, and skip, and then do this one. You can see there's basically 3 different lengths here. This last one here I'm going to end up patterning. So I'm going to say OK. Next I'm going to go ahead and fix this line so it doesn't move, and then I'm going to tell the software that these 2 lines are essentially parallel to that first one. Next I'm going to put a couple of dimensions on here, so this point to this next line, and I'm going to kind of round it up. So I'm going to say, let's say that was 510, so I'll say 0.510, and then I'll do the same thing here. For this point to this point, I'll put a dimension on it at 0.510. Okay. Next, I just need to pattern this last or third line here. So I'm going to say I'm going to do a linear pattern, and I'm going to pick this line, and it's going kind of in the opposite direction currently. So I'm just going to drag this arrow to the other side, and instead of 90, I'll do 270. And next, I'll need to adjust my spacing. Again, it's going to be 0.510. And I'm going to go ahead and leave it at 8. I think that's enough. It wouldn't hurt. I guess we can just say 9. We're just going to make it a little bit longer than the drill bit just to ensure that it cuts all the way through. 8 might have worked, but 9's not going to hurt. So I'll go ahead and say OK to that. And really for this is all we need to draw. So I'm going to go ahead and exit the sketch. And next we need to go to a 3D sketch. Just a standard 3D sketch, not a mesh sketch, but just a sketch. And on this ribbon bar here, we have the ability to unroll or roll curves. So here, we're actually going to roll the curves. The target is going to be just the sketch prior to this 3D sketch. and my axis is the same, vector 1, and my start point is the same as before. So I'll click on the point number 1, and I'll say OK. So that is the result of doing that. So now we have a couple of splines that we can use to essentially create a sweep, and then we can create a feature that's going to actually cut that main body out. But first, before I do that, since these were individual lines, you can see if I hover over a spline, the whole thing doesn't highlight. It just kind of segments this because of the way that the Unroll worked with my lines. So I need to merge these together. So I'm going to click on Merge. Let's try the average multiple curves, and I'm just going to start here and kind of just walk my way down this spline, or these splines, to make a single spline. So that's one. And then I'll repeat that command on the other one. So we'll start here, and again, just kind of walk down until all of these are merged. Okay, great. So go ahead and exit the sketch, and I'll turn my mesh back on, and I need to go back to the original unrolled version because I would need to create essentially the profile. These are going to act as a sweep, as a path, and I need a profile. So I'm going to go ahead and draw a simple profile on the right plane. And again, I can crop this out. I'm just going to start on the end here, like so. Maybe even crop this up a little bit more. That's the only little piece I need to see. So I'm going to say OK. Rotate that about. So I'm going to start with a line. It's basically going to act as the endpoint of this arc that I'm going to generate. So I'm going to go ahead and say, give me a line. I'm going to turn off that polyline and just kind of snap here and draw a line. And next, I'm going to go ahead and say, well, let's do a 3-point arc. And I'm going to kind of, since I don't want this little piece that juts up here and maybe not here, I'm just going to kind of window an area which will fit where I select. Okay. So doing that, now I can trim the left side to the line using corner trim. Okay, and I'm going to say OK. I'll delete this line here. I don't need it anymore. It's just for establishing the endpoint there. And next, I'm just going to resize this a little bit, just so it goes beyond the diameter of that drill bit scan. So that looks good. I'll say OK. And now I'm ready to exit the sketch. I'm going to go to a surface sweep because our profile here is open. So I'm going to go up to the Model tab and go to a surface sweep. And I'm going to say that my profile is the sketch. It's already selected. And my path is going to be this spline here. I'm going to change this here because it doesn't work by default. So I'm going to use this other spline as actually a guide curve. So I'm going to say follow path and first guide curve. Okay, so now my guide curve is going to be the second spline. So it gives us a preview there. And it looks pretty good at this point. So I'm just going to go ahead and accept it. Make sure it goes beyond the drill bit. You can see it does. I'll go ahead and accept that. Okay, so at this point, I'll turn on my surfaces here. I'll turn off my mesh for a second. And I need to thicken this because I'm going to actually subtract this. It's going to be a solid, and I need to subtract it from the main body. So I'm going to go ahead and go to the thickened surface, which is right here. And the body is going to be the surface body. And I just want to make sure I'm going to uncheck that because I'm not merging and I'm not cutting here because I need to use this again. So I just want to ensure it's going to the right side. So yeah, that's the side. I want it to go outward. Let's see here if this might be enough or not. It might not be. I'm going to go, I just need to be big enough for it to basically cover the whole solid body. So I'm going to go ahead and say less 0.2. Let's see without. Okay, so it accepts that. It might be a little too much, but it's not going to hurt. So actually, let me back that off a second here. Let's say 0.15. All right, we'll try that. So we'll say okay. And then next, if you look at the mesh here, it's actually, so this is like half of the spiral or helical cut. So we need to basically make a copy of this, but also rotate it. So I'm going to go to Transform Body, and under the Model tab, Transform Body. This is the body I'm going to transform. I'm going to duplicate it because it's a copy. So I'll go to the next step. And essentially, I'm rotating it 180 degrees about the y-axis, this green axis here. So I'm just going to go here just to type it in, 180, and say OK. All right. So at this point, I can go ahead and, this is pretty much the last step. I'm going to go ahead and Boolean subtract this out of the main body here. So back to Boolean, cut, target is this. My tool bodies are that body and this body. And boom, there you go. All right, so that looks pretty good. We could turn on our accuracy analyzer too, just to kind of verify that everything, like maybe we didn't miss anything. So there's like a high red area or high blue area, maybe we missed a feature. But looks like we got everything pretty good. A little bit yellow here, that's just based on the resolution of the scan. It's not really super high resolution. So you're going to get a little bit of a color there. But overall, I think this looks pretty good. So that's kind of how, in this case, we used the unroll command on the mesh, and then we use the roll command on the 2D sketch to create a couple 3D splines to use for a sweep. Thanks for watching. I hope you learned something. See you next time.